Ladies and gentlemen, it is less than a month until college football, and you know what that means. Today, we're going to be going over my predictions slash my own top 25. I wouldn't call this much a prediction. You can call it a prediction if you want. But in my opinion, this is my top 25. This is the Trasher Football official preseason top 25, as if my opinion matters. So without further ado, let's crack into it. And at number one, I think this is everybody's consensus number one, is the Georgia Bulldogs, the reigning national champions who went 15-0 last season. They won the SEC championship. They dominated almost everybody on their schedule, went undefeated, back-to-back national champions. I know that they're going to get number one. They got number one in the coaches poll. They got number one in everybody's preseason projections poll. But in my opinion, I do have Georgia at the number one of my poll, and I have them staying there up until the end of the season. And at number two, I have the Michigan Wolverines, who made it to the semifinals last year against TCU. Last season, they went 13-1, with their only loss being to TCU in the semifinals. They defeated Ohio State in a really good game. They won the Big Ten. That's a really good team. Now, I don't think they're going to be as good this year as they were last year, but I do have them starting off the season at number two, and they'll probably make a New Year's Six bowl game, but I don't have them making the playoffs again this season. Then at number three, I have the Michigan's rival Ohio State Buckeyes, who last season went 11-2. Now, Ohio State, also a really, really perennial Big Ten team, always usually in the top 5, top 10 somewhere every season. Coach Ryan Day leading a really good team up there in Ohio. I do have Ohio State making the playoffs this season. At least right now on this stage in the preseason, I do. I could all change mid-season, but in my opinion, I do have Ohio State at number 3. Then at number 4, I have the Alabama Crimson Tide, who went 11-2 last season, with losses to Tennessee and LSU. This is Alabama. It's really hard to lock Alabama outside of the top 5 in preseason polls. God knows how long it's been since Alabama has started off their preseason not ranked in the top 5. I think it might have been 2009, maybe, the season after, or 2 seasons after Saban was hired, I think. I don't know how well they did in 2008, but I know for sure they made the national championship in 2009. But and right now, I do have Alabama at my number 4 in the preseason poll. And then at number 5, I have the USC Trojans, who last season went 11-3, with losses to Utah twice, and then Tulane in the Cotton Bowl. Those 2 Utah games were really good. The first time, Utah kept it really close, and then the second time in the Pac-12 championship, Utah absolutely demolished them. But I do have USC making the playoffs this season. I think Caleb Williams is a really, really, really good quarterback. There's a reason why he won the Heisman Trophy. But I do have them at number 5 in the preseason poll, and we'll just have to see where it goes from there. Hopefully they can try and not lose any games this season. Then at number 6, I have SEC's Tennessee Volunteers, who last season went 10-2 with losses to Georgia and South Carolina. Tennessee, out of the blue, just became like a really good team. I remember in the preseason last season, everybody was like, Tennessee's going to be really good this season. And we've been hearing that for years at this point, and nobody really believed it. There was a couple of people who joined the hype train. I didn't believe it, for sure. But after the first couple of weeks, I really started buying the hype, especially when they beat Florida. And when they beat Bama and LSU and whatever. I do think Tennessee is the only chance at somebody beating Georgia. I don't think they will, but I think they're the closest thing to it, if you know what I mean. So Tennessee Volunteers at number 6. Then at number 7 in my preseason poll, I have the LSU Tigers, who went 10-4, which in my opinion is not really good to show with their record for how good of a team they were last year. if you understand. So like last season they had losses to Florida State, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Georgia. The loss to Florida State, I don't think they should have lost. The loss to Tennessee was really bad. But after they defeated Ole Miss and Bama, they really started to get up there. Is this LSU team as good as people are saying they are? I think they are. I think this season is the last season was really good for Brian Kelly's first season, but this one I do have LSU winning the West this season, only losing to Ole Miss. I have Ole Miss beating LSU in Ole Miss. I don't even think Ole Miss is going to be really of a great team. I just think it's just the one upset. LSU I don't think will go undefeated because they'll end up playing Georgia in the SEC championship and losing to them in my opinion. But I do have LSU at my my number 7 spot in my preseason poll. And then at number 8, I have the Clemson Tigers. Now, Clemson last season, they did go 11-3 with losses to Notre Dame, South Carolina, and Tennessee. They lost to Notre Dame in a really surprising game at Notre Dame. Notre Dame was kind of up and down last season. It was really hard for them to really decide if they were good or not, Brian Kelly's former team. And then they lost to South Carolina in their rivalry game with South Carolina in a game that it was a very long time since South Carolina had actually won that in their football games. The last time South Carolina had beaten them was 2013, before last season. That was way too many straight. I think it was 7 straight. But, yeah, I do have Clemson at my number 8 spot. And then at number 9, I have the Florida State Seminoles in a spot that a lot of people are really iffy about. Now, Florida State, I've seen a lot of being highly ranked in a lot of people's preseason polls. This past season, they only lost 3 games, which they lost to 3 really good teams. They lost to Wake Forest, they lost to NC State, and they lost to Clemson. NC State, in my opinion, really kind of fell off. Like, they started the season pretty solid in the ACC, starting off the season 6-1. They ended up only going 8-5. That was a really disappointing loss for Florida State, especially for it being in Florida State. Then they lose to NC State. Then they lost to Clemson, but you get some pretty decent wins against Georgia Tech, Miami, Syracuse, Louisiana, Florida, and then Oklahoma in the Cheez-It Bowl, which they only won by 3. But in a lot of people's opinion, they think Florida State's going to be an even better team, and I agree. But we'll just have to see. I could be 100% wrong. I could be 100% right, somewhere in the middle. But I do have Florida State at my number 9 spot in my preseason poll. And then at number 10, I have the Penn State Nittany Lions. The Nittany Lions being in the Big Ten. That's a really tough schedule to have to play in, you know. You have Ohio State. You also have Michigan. You also have Michigan State. But last season, Penn State did go 11-2 with only losses to Michigan and Ohio State. I don't think they did play Michigan State, and they won 35-16. Michigan State was like a good team a couple years ago, and then they kind of just fell off. But then they did defeat Utah in the Rose Bowl, and also a pretty good game. I do have Penn State at the number 10 spot, putting my top 10 at Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, USC, Tennessee, LSU, Clemson, FSU, Penn State. And so now at number 11, I have the Washington Huskies out of the Pac-12. Really, the Pac-4. I mean, that conference is like really falling apart with everybody deciding to either leave for the Big 10 or the Big 12. I think the best thing to do is to keep it alive is to combine it with the Mountain West. I might make a video on that, so stay tuned. But last season, Washington did go 11-2 with losses to UCLA and Arizona State. They did have some good wins against Oregon State and Oregon. But other than that, they really didn't play much of a challenging schedule. I mean, they did play Stanford, but they blew them out of the water. But the losses to Arizona State and UCLA were pretty surprising. They were both away games. So to keep a lot of, win all of their home games is impressive. But only 2 losses. I do have Washington at the number 11 spot. And then at number 12, I have the Utah Utes, who is also a really good Pac-12 team, and soon will be probably somewhere else. Their only losses last season were to Florida, UCLA, Oregon, and Penn State. This is a really, really, really good team that I don't think should have lost to Florida and Oregon, in my opinion. I kind of understand the UCLA game. UCLA's, for some reason, randomly good, just like every couple of years. But for this season, I do have Utah at number 12. I think that's a respectable spot for them going into their week 1 game against Florida. And then at number 13 out of 25, I do have the Texas Longhorns, who a lot of you I think are going to rank this a little high compared to everybody else. In my opinion, I think they're a better team this year than last year. What's his name? Quinn Ewers, however you pronounce it. I feel like will be a way better player this upcoming season. They did keep a 1-score game with Alabama. They do play Alabama again. I do have Alabama winning that game, but I do have Texas playing a lot better this season, and I think a lot of people are going to rank Texas high in their AP poll, just so that way Alabama can have a good top 25 win, in my opinion. If you understand where I'm getting that from, they did lose to Alabama, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, TCU, and Washington in the Alamo Bowl, but I think they're going to be a way better team. I think that they have an opportunity of winning the Big 12 before they leave for the SEC next season. But, yeah, I do have Texas at my number 13 spot. And then at number 14, I have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Now, last season, they did go 9-4 with some really disappointing losses. They lost their opening game to Ohio State, and then really, like, a embarrassing loss to Marshall. You started off your season number 5, lose to Ohio State. Okay, that's understandable. It's Ohio State. And then you lose to Marshall in week 2 when you were number 8. And then that's just straight up embarrassing. That's no knockdown to Marshall. Marshall usually ends up being surprisingly good out of nowhere. But Ohio State and Notre Dame do play again this season. That'll be a really, really, really fun game. They do play in South Bend at Notre Dame. But last season, they also lost to Stanford and USC in their rivalry game. But they had some really good wins. They beat BYU. They beat Syracuse. They beat Clemson. They also beat Navy, Boston College, South Carolina, and the Gator Bowl. I think Notre Dame's a better team than their record showed last year. Just those really embarrassing games to Marshall and Stanford really did it, in my opinion. But I do have Notre Dame at my number 14 spot. And then at number 15, I have the Oregon Ducks. Now, the Oregon Ducks did go 10-3 last season with losses to Georgia, Washington, and Oregon State, which are really respectable losses. I mean, Georgia's Georgia. They did get blown out in that game. Like, I remember watching that game and just being in awe. Like, because Oregon was a good team last season, but Georgia made them look like an FCS opponent. Like, seriously, they just embarrassed. I mean, embarrassed Oregon. But they did pick up some good wins. They beat BYU, and then they beat UCLA, who was ranked high at one point early last season. We discussed that a minute ago. Other than that, Utah, I guess, would be good, and then North Carolina in the Holiday Bowl. I mean, bowl games. Speaking of Holiday Bowl, I can't wait for it to get cold outside. I can't wait for Christmas and fall, and just, it's way too damn hot outside. But to get that out of the question, I do have Oregon at number 15. I think that they should improve this season. But, yeah, I do have them at that. And then at number 16, I do have the Kansas State Wildcats. Last season, they did win the Big 12 conference. But then they kind of lost to Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. Which it's Alabama. There's no embarrassment to that. Kansas State lost to Tulane, TCU, and Texas, and that loss to Tulane really should have been showing a lot of people. Tulane is a really, really good team, and we'll get to them later. Spoilers, but the loss to TCU is also understandable because, TCU played in the national championship, but they also got blown out. And then the loss to Texas. Texas was a good team last year, but then they defeated TCU in the rematch in the Big 12 championship. But they also had a win against Oklahoma, who really fell off after that game. They beat SEC team Missouri. They defeated Texas Tech and Iowa State in some good games. And the Iowa State game was really, really low scoring, only a 10-9 win. And then blew Oklahoma State out of the water, 48-0. And then a win against Baylor, West Virginia, and Kansas. This Kansas State team, it used to be really, really bad. Shout out to my friend Aiden. He's a Kansas State fan. Just thought that would be needed. But Chris Kleiman, I think that's how you pronounce his name, I think is really building something special post the Snyder era of Kansas State. So give me Kansas State at number 16. And then finally, you do have TCU at number 17. A lot of you were probably wondering, where is TCU ranked? Where is the runner-up national champions? I do have them at number 17 only because I think they were overrated. I mean, if you look at their schedule, who did they face? They faced an overrated Oklahoma. They beat an overrated Kansas by 1 touchdown, who had an easy first half schedule. They defeated Oklahoma State in 2 overtimes, which I guess is good because Oklahoma State was ranked number 8 at the time, but they also ended up going 7-6. Poor Mike Gundy. They beat Kansas State, which that is a good win. That is a good win. Kansas State was a good team. But you faced West Virginia, Texas Tech. Then you beat Texas by a touchdown. You beat Baylor by 1 point. Then you blow Iowa State out of the water. Then you lose to Kansas State. But then they beat Michigan in the Fiesta Bowl, which was a really impressive win, in my opinion. But then they get blown out by Georgia. I wish that they had more of a chance. I like TCU, but I think they were overrated last year. So that's why I'm giving them number 17 in the preseason poll. With Max Duggan now in the NFL, we're just going to have to see if TCU can do it again. I really doubt that they can, but I'd like to see it. But I really doubt it. TCU, in my opinion, is number 17 in my preseason poll. And then the number 18, I have the Ole Miss Rebels, who did go 8-5 last season, but I also don't think that's really indicative of how good of a team they were, at least for their second half of the season. We'll get there in a minute. They defeated Troy, Central Arkansas, Georgia Tech, Tulsa, and then a number 7 Kentucky, who was also overrated. That was a pretty interesting game because Kentucky was rated top 10 for like a quick minute, and then they really fell off. Then they defeated Vandy and Auburn. They did start off their season 7-0, and then they lose to LSU, and then they dipped down a bit. And then they beat Texas A&M, so they went back up. And then you lose to Bama, Arkansas, Mississippi State, and then Texas Tech. They really did fall off really quickly. I mean, Alabama's a really good team. LSU was a really good team. Arkansas, pretty underrated, really good team in my opinion. And then that loss to Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl, that really did it for them. And then bowl games, in my opinion, they don't really matter. I do have Ole Miss ranked number 18 in my preseason poll. Decent SEC team, but enough to be ranked. So I do have them, like I said, I sound like a broken record, but I do have them at my number 18 spot. And then at number 19, I have the North Carolina Tar Heels. They did have losses to Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, NC State, Clemson, and Oregon. And that was really interesting because they started off their season 9-1. Like, that's a really good start for North Carolina. Like, when they started off their season, they started off in the top 25 before their second loss. They were, they were ranked number 15 or number 13 before they lost to Georgia Tech. They started off their season not even ranked at all. So I think that's a crazy improvement For who's their head coach? North Carolina's head coach is Mac Brown. This is 14th season. This is a really great improvement for going 6-7 the season prior. So I believe that they do deserve a preseason ranking. I do have them at number 19. And then now I do have at my number 20 spot, I have good old Beamer Ball. I have the South Carolina Gamecocks, another Carolina team just across the border. Last season they did go 8-5 with losses to Arkansas, understandable. Georgia, also understandable. Missouri, they shouldn't have lost to Missouri. Just plain and simple. Florida, who really blew them out of the water. And then they lost to Notre Dame. But South Carolina also had some good wins. They defeated Kentucky, who was decent. They defeated Texas A&M, who was pretty bad last year. But if you told somebody, hey, South Carolina beats Texas A&M in the preseason, they would have probably not believed you. And then they defeated Tennessee and Clemson in those back-to-back last two games of the season, and games that nobody really thought that they would win. So, in my opinion, it's those two games, in my opinion, and then they're showing in the Gator Bowl, they did lose to Notre Dame, but those last three games really make me think that they deserve to be ranked in the preseason. Give them some preseason hype, and North Carolina and South Carolina do play in week 1, I think. So that should be an interesting game for people to see. And I think the winner of that game is going to be the good team for the season, and the loser will be not as good. That's how teams win and lose sometimes. And then at my number 21 spot, a lot of you are probably going to disagree with me on this, but I have Oklahoma. Last season, they did start off with a preseason ranking of number 9. And then after their losses to Kansas State and TCU and Texas, they really fell off. Now, they went 6-7, losing to Kansas State, TCU, Texas, Baylor, West Virginia, Texas Tech, and Florida State. And a team that a lot of people had hope for. They really fell off, but this was their first season post Lincoln Riley after him leaving for USC. So they do have Brent Venables as their head coach. I think that they're going to improve this season. Let me look at their schedule for 2023. I think they have a chance to start out maybe 6-0, 5-1 maybe. The only games I could see them losing is maybe Texas, Oklahoma State, maybe TCU, or maybe one more. So 8-4 I think is respectable for them. And I think that's respectable enough of a spot for number 21. And then at number 22, I do have the Texas A&M Aggies. Now, Texas A&M, yeah, I think a lot of you really think that, I mean, I've had Texas A&M on the mind for the last day. I watched the Johnny Manziel documentary. Really good documentary. You guys should watch it if you haven't. But Texas A&M really only had wins to Sam Houston, Miami, Arkansas, UMass, and LSU, which is weird because Miami was ranked number 13, Arkansas was ranked number 10, LSU was ranked number 5. They had 2 top 10 wins, a top 5 win, and a top 15 win for three top 15 wins and 2 top 10 wins and 1 top 5 win. And then they also lost to Mississippi State, Alabama, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Florida, and yes, even Auburn. The Florida game, 97,000 people showed up hoping that Texas A&M would win. Nuh-uh. Even Florida beat them 41-24. And Florida was a not good team. And then they lost to Auburn. Auburn. Which, I mean, that was around the time that Coach Cadillac was being the interim head coach, but the big loss from last year for Texas A&M was Appalachian State, a team that Texas A&M paid to come in and play them. Yeah. That's up and down. Talk about up and down. They did go 5-7, but when you're going 5-7, the only way is up. They have DJ Durkin as the defensive coordinator, who has been under some controversy. He was the interim head coach of a Florida game that I went and saw against ECU. Just thought I'd mention that. But he also had that player death thing at Maryland. I'm surprised he's really still coaching. And then you have Bobby Petrino. I still find it interesting that Bobby Petrino is still coaching. He's been coaching since the early 80s. Like, respect to Bobby Petrino for that, being the offensive coordinator at Texas A&M. I think that they're going to have a big turnaround. They are number 25 in the coaches poll, which I think is respectable. They do have some interesting games. I think that they could go 8-4 maybe this season. I don't think I did a predictions video on them already, so I hope I'm not eating my words. But okay, I haven't, so I will at some point. But yeah, so I do have Texas A&M being my number 22 preseason spot. And then at number 23, we're almost finished. So make sure you eat your last kernels of popcorn. I have Tulane. Tulane was a magnificent team last season. They won the Athletic Conference. They won the Cotton Bowl. They defeated, get this, Kansas State, the Big 12 champions. They defeated USC, in my opinion, they were the better team of Utah, but Utah beat them both twice. I just think that Utah, it's hard to explain. They beat a number 10 USC. They defeated UCF in the Athletic Conference Championship, who they also lost to just a couple of weeks earlier to make up for that. And then their only other loss was to Southern Miss, and they lost that by a field goal. I mean, they beat Houston, ECU, South Florida, Memphis, Tulsa, Alcorn State, and UMass. I mean, Alcorn State and UMass are Alcorn State and UMass. But Tulane had a really big chance to go undefeated last season. I think Tulane has a really big chance to be a really good team this upcoming season. This is Willie Fritz's 9th season with Tulane. Right now, their schedule is looking South Alabama, and then that Ole Miss game. I think a lot of people need to pay more attention to that Ole Miss game. Ole Miss and Tulane will be very good because it'll also be in Tulane Stadium. This is also a rivalry game, and a rivalry game that hasn't been played 2011, and before that, 2012. And Tulane hasn't beaten Ole Miss since 1988. And I think that Tulane has a chance to do it this season. To reignite the rivalry again, I think this will be a really good game. And then you have that rivalry game with Southern Miss. And you got Nicole State, UAB, Memphis, North Texas, Rice, ECU, Tulsa, FAU, and UTSA. That UTSA game is also going to be a very good game. This is an opportunity for Tulane to be just be a really good team. I know I keep saying that. I'd love to see Tulane become a Power 5 team in the future, but as long as they're in the American Athletic Conference, they won't. They just won't. But I do have Tulane at my number 23 preseason spot. I mean, for a 12-2 record, that's like a top 10 team. But in my opinion, they're ranked low because of their strength of schedule last season and the fact that they were in the American Conference. But for them to be in the Cotton Bowl and defeat USC, I mean, that's just magnificent. Then at number 24, I do have Texas Tech, the Red Raiders I think they're from Lubbock. I think that's Lubbock, Texas is where they're from, if I'm not too mistaken. Last season, they did have losses to NC State, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Baylor, and TCU. They also had some wins against Houston, Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Ole Miss in the Texas Bowl. Really big win against Ole Miss, too. They went 8-5, and then the season prior, they went 7-6. So technically, that's an improvement. And then I'd like to see an even bigger improvement for 2023. They haven't had a really good season in a pretty long time. If I'm looking at their old schedule, it's been a long time since Texas Tech has been a really good team. The last time they had the record about 8-5 was 2013. And yeah, I think that just says all of it. This is a chance for Texas Tech to be good again. They did go 8-5, and so I think they deserve a top 25 preseason spot. So I'll put them at number 24. And then at number 25 in the Trasher Football top 25, I have the UTSA Roadrunners. Now, last season, they did win the Conference USA Championship. They also lost the Cure Bowl to Troy, which, I mean, it's Troy. They always end up winning some games. But UTSA did get a top 25 bid. Or not bid, but you know what I mean. In their bowl game against Troy. Now, Troy also went 12-2. And in my opinion, Troy would be my number 26 spot. But there is no top 26. It's a top 25. UTSA only lost to Houston in 3 overtimes and lost to Texas at Texas. Understandable. It's Texas. The only other big wins that they had were maybe UAB, that they won in double overtime. They also had 3 overtime games, Houston, Army, and UAB. Oh yeah, and the Army game, it was in Army, so that's really impressive. I think they deserve the spot. For them to be ranked at the end of the season and lose by only one score in their bowl game is really interesting. So to end that off, we do have Georgia 1, Michigan 2, Ohio State 3, Alabama 4, USC 5, Tennessee 6, LSU 7, Clemson 8, Florida State 9, Penn State 10, Washington 11, Utah 12, Texas 13, Notre Dame 14, Oregon 15, Kansas State 16, TCU 17, Ole Miss 18, North Carolina 19, South Carolina 20, Oklahoma 21, Texas A&M 22, Tulane 23, Texas Tech 24, and UTSA 25. That has been the official Trasher Football Top 25 preseason. I wouldn't say predictions. This is just my preseason choices. And then tomorrow I will do a video where I react to the top 25 when it is officially announced tomorrow afternoon. I hope you guys had a good day. Thank you for sticking around for this super long video, and I will see you guys tomorrow.